But also, I just want to recognize we do have a couple of elected officials with us here today. John Terrio, member of the Select Board, and Dennis. John, nice to have you. Gordon Starr, town councilor for Precinct 1 in the town of Barnstable. And our speakers, should we have both of them, are from Barnstable and from Yarmouth. And our hopes is, with one of our first things that we'll be getting into is just sort of the difference between those two types of government. It's helpful to know the role of the planning board as it relates to that. But Rob, why don't you start us off with just sort of the legal.
Sure. And I just want to
grounding.
add in recognizing, I did see that Charlie Bloom, I think is still on. I know he was on at one point.
Oh,
Thank you, Rob.
Yes.
I'm here.
So,
Thank you.
sorry
yes,
about
want
that.
to recognize town councilor for Barnstable as well. So it is great to see, all of, so many councilors and other, engaged, participants who play a role, in in kind of in planning and zoning and the creation of housing. So just to kind of, again, add my value as the lawyer, legal grounding is when we're talking about planning boards, is in Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, which of course is the Subdivision Control Act, and that's sections 81K through 81GG. That's where planning boards are created under Mass law, and given their principal roles. And we talk about principal roles, of planning boards. I think of them as two main ones. One being under the Subdivision Control Act, obviously, is subdivision approval, which historically had played, a much bigger, part of the responsibilities for planning boards when Cape Cod, had land, that we were subdividing and creating, all of the historic neighborhoods, that exists in every town. Each of those, after passage of the Subdivision Control Act, all of those had to go through planning boards. So planning boards again played a role in enforcing all the provisions and standards under the Subdivision Control Act, and essentially, carving up lots or carving up land to create lots. So planning boards gave us our subdivisions and gave us our neighborhoods. Now, I view the primary role of the of subdivision, or a primary role of planning boards, not being necessarily creation of subdivisions, but the submission and review of zoning amendments. So another principal role for planning boards under the Subdivision Control Act and also under the Zoning Act, Chapter 40A, is that proposals, to adopt new zoning, to amend existing zoning, pass through planning boards on their way to either town council, in the case of Barnstable, or onto town meeting. That distinction, between the two forms of government that that was alluded to. And I think, when we talk about the creation of zoning amendments, and in light of the housing crisis, that we're in, as someone that's both developed and represented folks in front of, planning boards and represented developers who are trying to bring, innovative approaches. The planning boards really are the gatekeepers to, innovation in zoning, and how are we as communities, making informed decisions about new approaches, new models, that can make more efficient use of land, where infrastructure currently exists. On the Cape here, when we talk about, infrastructure linked to housing, we're really talking about, about wastewater, or, where infrastructure is going to be coming. So how do we, prepare the land around that for, development or redevelopment? So again, if Matt, if you're on, I'd love to hand this, over to you to talk about, what your experience, has been, and the roles of the planning board as you see them. And certainly there are others. Planning boards can serve as a special permit granting authority. Planning boards have standing, in appeals, and that's something that we know firsthand. Some recent developments here in the Cape. And planning boards must consent whenever there's a repetitive petition for a zoning amendment being considered within 2 years after initial rejection, whether at town council or at town meeting. So, Matt, do we have you?
Not quite yet. He's almost.
Okay.
We
So,
almost have it resolved, but I thought I would bring up something, Rob, just sort of like, backing up to the sort of 30,000 foot perspective. Just kind of backing up to, what is this whole idea of zoning anyways, right? So, back in, 100 years ago, we didn't have any zoning. So it was just sort of, if you wanted to put, cars were barely invented, but if you wanted to put a gas station next to a single family home, you could do that. And, or you could put an industrial plant next to a neighborhood. That is on his way in. Yes. So, that's the whole reason that zoning evolved is, we started to see problems like that, and a need arose to have people in communities taking a look and say, hey, maybe that wastewater treatment plant or that power plant or what have you belongs in a commercial area, et cetera. And then it has evolved. If you take a look at the fact that, as of right in the state of Massachusetts, single family homes and now accessory dwelling units are allowed as of right. And so if you as a municipality want to go beyond that and you want to legalize multifamily homes, apartment buildings, et cetera, you have to go through a planning process where you create a zoning bylaw that would apply across the board. And then the other way that you also mentioned is really important is someone could say, I want to bypass that existing zoning and get a special permit. So they have to get that special authorization. That's a really key place that planning board comes in. Matt, are you with us?
I am. Yep.
Thank you. Yay.
Hey, sorry about that. I've never had that many problems with Zoom, but I guess now we know.
And now
So-
Jim says he can't get in either. So we're going to work on
Oh,
that as
jeez.
well. But could you talk to us a little bit about the role of the planning board in general and as it relates to the town council in the town of Barnstable? Because, we have some
Sure.
people here from the rest of the Cape that tend to have elected or open town meeting. And then
Sure.
Barnstable, which is the one, unique one on the Cape that doesn't have that.
Yep. So the planning board in Barnstable, outside of its kind of functional role in terms of approving subdivisions or approval not required plans, some special permitting falls under our purview. But in terms of actual zoning changes, that is generally sponsored by a member of the town council, and they will bring a proposal to us, or you can do it by referendum, which we're actually looking at a matter now that was brought to the board by referendum. We will vet that new proposed bylaw through public hearing, and then our job really is to make a recommendation for the town council. We would either recommend to adopt or to not adopt the bylaw, and then the town council will officially adopt the bylaw at a public hearing, and they can, if let's just say we did not recommend adoption, and they can still pass it. If we do not recommend a bylaw be passed, and they also do not recommend that that's passed, there's generally, I think it's a 2-year cooling off period where that specific bylaw cannot be brought back to the town under the repetitive petition concept, right? So basically, they can't come in every week. Somebody can't come in every week with the zoning bylaw, not get it approved, and then clog the board's time with repetitive petitions of the same matter.
right. Unless there was consent from the planning board to take it up within
Right.
the 2 years. Yep.
Yep. So that's generally our function in terms of what people are most concerned about would be changing zoning bylaws.
Yeah. Matt, one of the things, one of the topics that, when I 5 minutes before this began was asked to was asked to help field, that I was hoping to get out was looking at compositions of the planning boards,
Sure.
who actually is sitting on planning boards. Stephanie gave kind of a 30,000 foot view on zoning and the history of
Yep.
zoning
Sure.
as originating from separating industrial uses from being right next door to residential uses. So it was
Yep.
kind of protective
Hmm.
of health and of housing. But now with a default, and I'm not just talking about the Cape, or I'm not just talking about Massachusetts, but really nationally, if you look at national maps that show where is the default zoning single family, and then where is it allowed you know anything but single family. It looks like those cell phone carrier maps when one is trying to say we cover the entire
Oh,
country,
sure.
that
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
that being single family housing, and then here's our competition, they cover nothing, and that being
Right.
being multifamily. So now with kind of a default to single family um zoning, being a challenge to get anything other than single family. So zoning, going from something that kind of protected housing and
Sure.
separated it from industrial uses to now kind of zoning, default zoning, and particularly, single family zoning being a hurdle, that stands in the way of adopting, more innovative, zoning, or zoning that is going to bring a higher component. And
Density.
then
Yep.
corresponding with folks that are sitting on a planning board,
Hmm.
and wondering if you could speak to your experience, kind of the composition of the folks who are sitting there. Are they sitting, or typical planning board members sitting in kind of a protection of single family zoning, or members who are sitting and as kind of in terms of pushing the envelope and being advocates and being open to more innovative, more innovative zoning.
And I'll
Yeah. I
just
I think.
jump in and just say that Jim is with us as well. So Matt, if you're
Yeah.
done, Jim
Yeah.
wants
Sure.
to add in.
Yeah. 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 I'll be brief. I mean, I've been in the building business for 27 plus years. And I will say that, initially, especially if you look at the history of the state of Massachusetts, especially on the Cape, is that zoning was used as a convenient suppressor to high density development, right? And you can debate that, but once you saw small lots become allowed, and then if you look at the history of zoning in many towns on the Cape, it got larger. The minimum lot sizes got larger and larger and larger. It was a way to keep smaller, higher density development out of the state. In terms of the composition of the board, we're fortunate in Barnstable. I'm on the board, have experience in the industry, know how to read plans. I spend much of my day or week time, reading zoning bylaws, because for me to make a living, I have to figure out how to do this in some way, shape, or form. Um, we've also got Tim O'Neill on the board, who's in a similar position to me. He's a builder. You've got Steve Robichaud, who's uh, really runs a mechanical contracting company, heating, plumbing, electrical, stuff like that. And then you've got some other members who are just interested citizens who are volunteered to participate in the process, have an interest in the future of the town, or at least the ability to participate in the future of the town. And I think in my history, and I originally got on the planning board in Barnstable in 2008. All I've heard is excuses why we can't do it, and the convenient excuse was always the septic guys, right? Well, Title Five, and that kind of shut down anyone's intent to do higher density development. Really, over the last 15 years, that problem has come to the forefront now, along with the housing need. And I think, we are very open to any sort of concept that makes sense, that serves a need and still keeps, general public safety in mind, right? You can't build second-rate buildings. You've got a building code for that. You've got to create a safe condition. But very rarely, I think people could come to the board and make an argument, say we don't need more housing,
Mm.
until a proposal comes up when they go, well, I don't want it next to me. As long as it's not next to me, I'm happy with it. And I think that's a real struggle right now.
That is something we often hear in the housing advocacy world. Jim Sabin, thank you for joining us from the town of Yarmouth Planning Board. What can you tell us, building on Rob's question about, who you tend to see participating and serving on these committees, and what the sort of general approach has been the past however many years you've been on the committee?
Sure. First of all, I apologize for my tardiness. I suffered technological difficulties, I think is the term used.
You weren't alone.
I think I would say that no two planning boards are equal. The makeups of planning boards are wide in variety, from just average citizens that want to get involved to people who have degrees in planning. Sadly, I think if I look at the makeup of planning boards across typically the Cape, there's very few members of boards that are of the age group that is going to be the most affected, and that's the 40-year-olds and the 30-year-olds. When you think about it, old geezers like me are making decisions for future generations. And that's what planning boards, we look at land use and zoning, and how a community wants to develop. And when you think about it, most of the people on these planning boards won't ever see the end result, but they're the ones that are making the decisions for the future. So I think it's important to find ways to get those, I don't know what generation they are, Millennium, Z, A, B, F, I don't know, but younger people more involved in the process, and with things like Zoom. Even though I struggled to get here, it's a great way for younger people who have other things to do in life to get involved with the community by simply watching the planning board on the Zoom meetings and getting to understand the makeup of that committee. And I think Rob asked a question about are they all advocates or no? My experience in Yarmouth, it's well documented. It took us 18 months to get a UAD bylaw passed, and there are members of the planning board that were not in favor of it, and there were those that were, and it took some doing. And when you went to those meetings, 95% of the people that showed up to speak were against everything. Going to ruin the character of our town. I don't want those people in this neighborhood. You've heard all the millions of excuses, but those are the people that show up at planning board meetings, and it's not those of us that think it's a good idea to be able to have a UAD by right versus special permit, for example. And if the planning boards don't hear from people, even if you're watching on Zoom and sending an email or text them and say, hey, I think this is good or bad, because they really are a reflection of the community. In Yarmouth, you're appointed by the select board, and I think that's probably the case in most planning boards. Some have elected members in other areas, but most of the Cape boards are selected by the selectmen. So if you want to get involved and get on the board, then you need to reach out to the selectmen and fill out the talent bank. But just don't fill out the talent bank. Actually reach out to the selectmen and talk to them, because it's a lot of heavy lifting to go out and find somebody to serve on boards and committees as a whole. So if you reach out to them, they're thrilled that, okay, I don't have to go find somebody because somebody found me. So I think that's how you kind of get more advocacy of more advocates involved, is to start by doing simple things like watching the board meetings and sending notes and getting educated on what the issue is. Yarmouth, it was the biggest one was by right or special permit, and parking was another issue, but the governor's latest initiatives for housing, now our planning board has to go back and look at our zoning bylaws, which is what planning boards do, to see how these changes affect our existing bylaws and whether we can change them in ways that may even be better than what the governor has suggested, or most importantly, how we make them conform to what the new requirements are for housing.
Thanks, Jim. And while we're on that topic, I'm going to ask Catherine to share a couple of slides that are from a study that some of you may have seen that came out of Boston University, probably about, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. I'm trying to remember the name of the Catherine Einstein. So I always have to think of the scientist, and I remember her name, who did the this study. I came out in 2019, and if you go to the next slide, it shows that basically whenever they studied comments, public comment at planning board meetings across the state. I mean, in every single area, including the Cape, and found that overwhelmingly the people who were coming to show up whenever there was a discussion of whether or not to allow multifamily housing, that the people who were showing up were overwhelmingly white. They were homeowners, and the median age was much higher than, as you mentioned, Jim and Matt. So, you know, this kind of skew, I think we can lose the slides now. Thank you, Catherine. This skew in terms of who comes up, you know, then again, I think the key thing I forgot to mention they were all overwhelmingly against those housing proposals. So, you know, when you see that type of participation reflecting really only one segment of the population, can you guys comment just about how that, you know, how you would like to see things handled differently, if, you know, why you think it is that people tend to show up, you know, in opposition of things and not in support of things, just your general kind of take on that type of participation.
Well, I think the first thing is clearly, you know, the issue of NIMBY. You know, people are okay with something happening in another part of town, but once it's going to affect them, as they would say, then they that's when they come out to speak, and that's just, I think, the American way. You know, we don't ever come out and say, "Yay, you're doing a great job." We come out and say, "Hey, you're doing a bad job." And I don't know how you change that, but I think it's you know, driven by the subject matter and how it affects the individuals within the community.
Yeah. Or maybe how they perceive that it's going to affect them.
True.
And I'd love to just pick up on that point, you know, Jim, and ask you and ask Matt. I mean, what do you hear, you know, when folks are saying that, you know, zoning change is gonna affect them? What meat on that statement, you know, are they saying? How do folks perceive that you're seeing in front of your boards that might be turning out, you know, in opposition to a zoning change, or whether it was the, you know, the by right ADUs versus special permit? But what are you typically hearing as expressed concerns over, you know, resulting from zoning changes?
Well, I'll go first, Matt, if you don't mind. I think,
Yeah, go ahead.
In my case, my long history of sitting on boards, when people get up and talk, it's kind of like when they get up and talk at town meeting. They don't have to have any facts based upon what they're saying. A lot of it is emotion, and you know, that is a big part of any of this. And I think as a member of the planning boards, you've got to recognize that you know, if they tell you you know, if you do this, ABC is going to happen. Well, as a member of the planning board, you have to recognize that maybe A, B, and C won't happen, but you've got to be able to kind of rationalize all of that and bring it to an understanding that, you know, like anything else, we're not all going to agree on everything, but finding a compromise in the middle and reflecting the concerns. In Yarmouth, it was you're going to destroy the character of our community. Was a huge cry, but for me personally, I wasn't buying it because it was a community I grew up in. So I kind of had an understanding of what their concerns were, but as planning board members, you just got to look at the value of the whole community and not just one particular individual or neighborhood.
Matt?
Yeah, I think what we see is that fear is a greater motivator than opportunity for people, right? And there's a comfort level and a perception, especially with housing, that there's a million arguments against it. And if people are fearful, if there's a flurry of information against a certain issue, again, whether it's right or wrong, it's very easy to shoot holes in any opportunity for change, right? You drive the same way to work every day and they say, well, we're going to put a stoplight there. People go crazy about the stoplight. But maybe there's a necessity that's beyond, not putting one in, right? So, and I think one of the other things that I think is very true is that the loudest voice at a meeting is not always the right voice, right? So the fact that if there's fear of change, that motivates people to come out in opposition. They oftentimes will very much outweigh the support. And I will say one of the hard things on the planning board, because we do try to listen to all sides of the argument, is that very rarely do people offer us facts, anecdotal information. Take your pick, right? The internet is a vast dumpster of fear mongering. And very rarely do people say, hey, there's statistics out there that would, if you looked at them, without the name of a town on them, you say, geez, these guys have a housing problem, right? People are driving an hour and a half to work on the Cape. Well, it's because there's no housing here. It's much easier to shoot holes in something and keep the status quo. And, I got to commend some of these towns and organizations that have continued to beat the drum for a sensible, I'll use the term sensible change. Mm-hmm. It finally worked. I will tell you, the reason I got on the planning board in 2008 is I thought ADUs were an incredible concept and should have been in the mix from day one, back when you could build them for $100,000 a piece. And now we've missed. Now we have the opportunity, and it's so expensive to build them. I'm fearful we won't see that come to fruition.
Yeah. So, being mindful of time, I wonder if we could kind of switch into talking a little bit about the actual nuts and bolts of the review process, of the decision-making process, because for organizations like ours, we certainly know that so much of the sausage making is happening in the planning board, that level, before it gets to town meeting or to town council. But if you're new to advocacy, it's something that I think that we should go over a little bit of. Can you tell us a little bit what that's like?
Like in terms of how advocates could better support us given initiative?
How they can support the initiative, but also what does the process look like? So we started talking about that a little bit about, maybe it's something is coming from, a directive maybe coming from the town council, but another times maybe coming from town staff in terms of, an idea or from a citizen's petition. But, what's the process in terms of review, having a public hearing, and where are the opportunities for the public to engage?
You want to go first, Matt?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think the opportunities to engage can be attendance at some of the other subcommittees that many of these towns have. The housing committee, there's a number of them, right? That can give advisory opinions to a planning board. For example, when we get word of a new bylaw coming down the pipeline, we'll do some research on it. Oftentimes I will go look at something similar that's been enacted in another town. what are the comments in favor of it? What are the concepts that are against it, right? And really prepare yourself for what both sides of the argument are, because certain things fit in certain towns and other things don't fit in others. And you really have to look at it with both eyes open and be willing to listen to what the pro and counter arguments are. Once we get to the hearing stage, I know on the Barnstable Planning Board, we lend a lot of credence to letters written to the board and also public comment, right? Unfortunately, I think the public comment draws out more of the kind of the fearful reaction to a given concept. And oftentimes, people are much more articulate in a letter saying, hey, I really support this. We live on XYZ street. My daughter wants to move back to the Cape. She's got a job, but she commutes from, Wareham. And, some firsthand information is very helpful to us, because we don't see the totality of a given issue at that initial stage, right? We have enough. I mean, we may oftentimes we'll get briefed in months in advance that something is pending. But for instance, we had an issue come up on citizens petition in Barnstable a few weeks ago about changing the marijuana district, and I figured there'd be people lined out the door. Not one person showed to talk about it. Not one comment in favor or opposition. Which 5 or 10 years ago would have packed the room with people.
That might speak more to a lack of having a active press here on the Cape than anything.
Yeah, right. That's a big factor too, right? That's a big factor too. I will say that oftentimes the town planner is really working in the background once an issue is going to come to the planning board, and they can influence that process as well. Right?
Jim?
They can.
Yeah. Actually, I agree, Stephanie. One of the biggest things today is that we don't have a local newspaper per se that gets that information out as much as we did as kids. There's a couple of ways. Speaking of advocacy, there's a few ways a bylaw or an article gets to town meeting, and one is through petition. First Amendment, we have a right to petition our government, and that's one in which, for example, HAC had a draft bylaw that you could petition to actually have that come forward. Or the other way is to work with the planning board to create a bylaw that meets the needs that you're looking for. I always recommend to people that, step one, if there is a step one, it's to have a sit down with the town planner, talk to the town planner and find out where they're coming from. Because in many cases, the town planner, that's the captain of the ship. They can direct a planning board in ways that are beneficial to you if you work with them and make sure that the bylaw that is being presented. Well, most importantly, the idea is to get it past the town meeting, right? So looking at the bylaw that you're trying to get passed and recognizing areas where you can make compromise and still have a bylaw that meets your needs. But I think understanding that those two process, and if a town's starting to talk about, so in Yarmouth, for example, we started because we recognized we didn't have an ADU bylaw, and I thought it was kind of embarrassing that out of the 15 towns, we were one of 2 that didn't. So that kind of got that whole discussion moving forward. A petition came forward, and the planning department and the petitioners agreed to work together to get the bylaw that was ultimately passed at town meeting. So I think that the advocacy part, start with talking to the town planner. Less is more. Nothing will turn a planning board off than having 10 people get up and say, I think the color blue is great. Well, after the first one, that people think the color blue is great. So, redundancy of particularly when you're there to speak at a meeting, is not necessarily helpful. Try to come with new ideas and solutions to the problem. And again, follow up with emails or notes to the planning board. And I think those are the ways to get something through a town meeting.
That's great.
Yeah, one other thing real quick too. I think people are fearful, the general public, should really remember that, the town planner, the building commissioner, these are your public servants.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have a good idea, don't be afraid to approach them and schedule a meeting or a phone call and say, hey, I was thinking about this. Does it make sense? Have you guys looked at this? Whatever the concept is, right? They're your public servants. They're here to help make things better. And not every proposal has wings, but if you don't bring them forward, they go nowhere.
Yeah, I would echo that and just say, when I worked for elected officials, whether that be at the state level or, for the congressman, if we got 5 phone calls on an issue, it was like, wow, this must represent like everyone out there must feel this way, because
Right.
a lot of people do not engage with their elected officials or their appointed officials. So when you start to hear even a few comments, it tends to give the impression that is representative of a much larger sample. Now that's not necessarily accurate, but that tends to be the way that a lot of people in decision-making roles tend to think of it. So that is why it's always important to have our voices heard, even if it is just I agree with the most recent speaker, and adding your own comments, not emphasizing their same points as Jim said. Given that we are running kind of low on time, I know we got started a little bit late, so I understand if people need to jump off. But I do want to open it up since we have I think a manageable size audience. If folks did want to ask questions, we could go through. I see Bob already has his hand up and it is unmuted. So go ahead, Bob.
So the heading of this is gateway to housing production is the heading for the session. And I guess the comment is, I think a lot of planning boards are caught up in the stuff that comes at them because of the volume of it in so many of the towns down here that they have to make decisions on, full agendas. How much time do Jim and Matt C spend trying to plan for the housing production, or in general dealing with zoning issues and what's best for the town versus handling the day-to-day things that you have to respond to?
The applications, the special permit applications.
Yes, and
Yeah.
all that other stuff, which is time consuming too.
So how much are planning boards actually planning?
Bingo. Well put.
So in
Probably-
Yarmouth, we have a full plate. We spent 18 months discussing the ADU bylaw, listening to the community and building compromise. That consumed a lot of our time. We're also writing our local comprehensive plan, also something that consumes a lot of time. So in most cases, we get to work on a particular item, and there'll be something that'll come along that says like a housekeeping article that can be handled rather quickly. We'll have a few discussions in a couple of meetings and be able to move it forward towards town meeting. But the bigger issues, for example, sewering, how's that going to affect the redevelopment of your community? You've got 5,000 square foot lots, and now all of a sudden you've got a bloodline to that lot that says, no, you don't have to be restricted by the number of bedrooms because you have sewering. So, long-term planning, I think is something that should happen more often in planning boards, but I think most of it is what's right in front of you today.
Yeah, I would think we probably spend 40% of our time on, I'll call it administrative duties, A&R plans, sign-offs on subdivision and stuff like that. We do spend we try to get like briefings from the local comprehensive planning committee at almost every meeting. If there's movement in the plan, we invite other advocacy groups or other entities in to just have an informal conversation about, I don't know, we had one on traffic and road changes the other day. I mean, the housing thing, I think Jim's right there. Anything that's a matter of high contention, major housing development, major zoning change, sometimes that's in the pipeline for a year or more, right? Trying to get some consensus, trying to tailor, the concept into a viable bylaw. I'm sure there's a pile of bylaws that don't really make it to us. And in some towns, you do have a gatekeeper. I know in the town of Dennis, you can't get on the town meeting agenda without going through the finance committee, right? So they can kill an issue without even talking about it. It just doesn't make it to it just dies in committee basically, and they don't put it on the town meeting agenda because they didn't like it. That's it. It's over.
How about, I see Mary Nee, she has herself unmuted. Mary, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to offer, I'm from Eastham and I'm chairing a zoning task force. And just as an alternative that Eastham has been doing is in 2020, the select board created this body, the task force, which had representatives from planning, ZBA, affordable housing, private sector, general citizens. So our function in town is to take a set of zoning issues and do the research and analysis each year, and then bring those back to the select board, to the planning boards, everyone who has, approval authority. But Eastham had recognized that there needed to be a separate body, which was just dealing with the issues of research and planning, because the boards themselves, just in terms of their regular business, that was really too much. So it's just an alternative I'm suggesting that's out there.
Thank you, Mary.
We see that we see that in Barnstable a lot. There's a housing committee that was assembled by the town council. We're going to start working with them in a few weeks. So that's a great way to take some of the burden off of members of the board.
Yep.
We've
Yeah.
done that in Yarmouth as well. We have the Matakees Middle School property, which is a 70-acre parcel that they've a separate committee looking at how to redevelop it. But will come through the planning board ultimately, but that separate committee is doing the work of studying that particular parcel of land. And also in Yarmouth and probably a lot of other towns, planning board members don't just serve as planning board members, they serve on other boards and committees as representatives of the planning board. And so that's how the connections kind of sometimes go.
Yeah. But I mean, I think to the sort of broader point, just to make a pitch for, participation, if anyone, does feel so inclined to get involved and start serving on one of these committees, I'd certainly urge people to get involved and serve on the planning board, because it really does matter who gets appointed to these various committees, right? You can easily stack a committee with people who are opposed to housing and are just not going to move the needle at all. We've seen that happen in a number of towns that will remain nameless. And so, your participation is really helpful. It's key, it's critical if we're going to ever really move the needle and have the type of housing that we need. I'd also say the other thing too, that I'm hoping we can get to a point of going back to that original point of, people's opposition is grounded in fear. And if we don't have any way to visualize how change could look and how it's not quite so scary, then it's understandable for people to be concerned, right? And so there are now tools between form-based code and working with consultants from like Union Studios out of Providence and other places that I think Eastham is one of the towns that has worked with them, where you can sort of do this community by design process. So you can actually put together with the consultants visual designs of, hey, if we made this zoning change, this is what this could look like. And you can actually provide a way through some participatory voting for the public to give, buy-in on that. Do we like this type of, height, this type of frontage, et cetera, so that they do feel that it blends with community character. That is, I think, another hope for how we could get to a point of maybe lessening some of that concern.
Stephanie, can I add something real quick?
Absolutely.
So I will tell you what happens if there is no movement and housing is a great example, right? It happened with wastewater. It's happening now with housing. The crisis level is so high. They're going to gather support at the state and they're going to ramrod policies down the town's throats because everybody sitting in this meeting today has a house on Cape Cod, right? There's a lot of people who don't. And economically, we can't survive without more people at all different economic levels living in every town of the Cape, not just Barnstable, not just Yarmouth, every town. And if we don't take action as citizens of your own individual town, the crisis level will get so high that the state's got to come in and say, you know, one lot, 1 unit for every 5,000 acres. Forget it. We're done. You build them up, right? They did the same thing with wastewater in the Outer Cape. They, you know, when they did those overlay districts and the feds came in and said, hey, we're going to put a gun to your head and now you have to build. So you have to do it, right? And that's painful and excruciating and very, very, very expensive. And it takes, and it's, but you know, it gets results, right? We're going to have ADUs in every town now.
Yeah. Or a judge puts, you know, says that you have.
Yeah,
to,
right.
Yeah.
There's your alternative is to go. And how many, Rob, you know this, how many houses lose at land court? How many developments lose at the housing court? None.
None. No, none. Housing court, you're going to prevail every day, all day.
Yep. It might take you 3 years, but
Right.
or 5 or 7, right? But the need is so high. It's shocking to me that people still find excuses why we can't do it sensibly. It's sad. It really hurts.
And the governor's recent action is proof in the pudding that, you know, as Yarmouth, again, as an example, we fought for 18 months about by right or special permit, and the governor just came in and said, enough of that, it's going to be by right. So home rule went out the window because we, as a Commonwealth, can't seem to get our act together on some of these issues. So, you know, that's, I think, right on that if we don't do something, they will.
Yeah.
And in some cases, even if you do something, they're going to do something as well. But one other thing I want to add about advocacy, it's great to be able to get on a planning board or other committees, but other ways that you can participate is when your planning department or your housing committee or your recreation committee or any of these different committees have studies or doing research, participate in that. Yarmouth is doing its local comprehensive plan. So it's important to hear from people. And that's a good way to start getting involved, and is to participate in some of these questionnaires and surveys and that different boards and committees are doing. And then you get a better feel for what's going on in town.
Yeah, I would take that a step further and say, share those surveys with your social networks, with you know, your churches, you know, your communities. You know, I've sort of beaten the drum for years now in Yarmouth about how we tend to hear from a lot of the same voices who tend to reflect that study because we're not reaching out to a lot of the people we need to be reaching out to who live in the town. And I think, you know, the whole debate over local control, well, you know, local control is predicated on the idea that you're going to serve all the people who live within the locality. And if you're not doing justice to that, if it's only lip service, then and you're only serving some of the people that have a more financial vested interest in keeping things the same, then yeah, you know, the state's going to look at it differently. Do we have any last questions for folks before we wrap things up? John, as a member of the select board, would you like to chime in?
Thank you. And thank you for doing this. And again, I want to thank Bob Somalik for, excuse me, letting me know, you know, about today's event. And, you know, I'm hearing everybody speak, you know, Jim and Matt and Rob and Stephanie, yourself and so forth. And, you know, we see the same things in Dennis. And, you know, I've lovingly, you know, named them the 59ers because they think it's 1959. And that's where they want to be and live. and so forth. So, but I have a question in regards to, is there a faster way? Is there a faster way to get housing than 40B?
Ugh.
Hmm.
Go back to 5,000 square foot lots and put a sewer system in.
Yeah.
That's the answer right there. It's done. Sewer's been the greatest excuse. It's a chemistry problem, right? We've had denitrification systems in piloting and provisional mode for 30 years in this state, and you still got to go get Board of Health approval to go get one, right? These things, it's been the elephant in the room, and nobody wants to talk about it. And now that the jig is up on wastewater, you better pass zoning to support it, because it's coming. If these towns have septic capacity and the state's
Yep.
it's
Agree.
coming. So you got a chance to do it now or not.
Hey, and John,
Yep.
Rob Brennan here. I'll chime in with one other, thing to consider. And I've brought this up before. Every planning board on the Cape, in my opinion, should be looking at Chapter 40Y, right? Which is the way to fast track single family starter homes, on quarter acre lots or smaller, and particularly where you have, sewer capacity existing, or where sewer is going to be going. That is a by right opportunity that provides carrots to every single town. The state pays the town for adopting an overlay district, based on what the hypothetical yield could be. So if you've got, let's say 14 acres on Route 28, you do the math of what, and the lots can be no larger than a quarter acre, but the state pays you for adopting the overlay district, and then the state pays you again for every single building permit that's issued. And that is a way, it then becomes by right, and it's a way to bring back the single family starter homes and hold on to those municipal employees, first responders, health service, employees that we're losing because they can't afford, to buy here. So that's another one that is a huge alternative to 40B, and it's a carrot instead of a stick.
Yep.
So Rob, I'm sorry, let me follow up with, please, Rob, if I can. So you said quarter acre on this 40Y, and I'll have to educate myself on the 40Y because I'm not familiar with it. And I know Bob Samalik. Bob, next time we have coffee, we should probably talk about this. But is there a minimum lot requirement?
Yep, it's 5 acres. You need 5 acres of land.
Yep.
And then within the 5 acres of land, you can pass a zoning overlay that says the lots are going to be 4 to an acre, 5 to an acre, 6 to an acre.
Okay.
And you're going to get starter homes that are going to look like, what we did at Heritage Sands,
Yep.
with a little more elbow room, and for year round. And I'd be happy to join you and Bob for coffee and talk more about it.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting, with it as well. Of course, as you know, Jimmy, we're a little bit behind you guys on sewer, but we're going to be we got it through, and we're going to be starting. And Matt, we're way behind you, certainly in Barnstable and so forth, but we're there.
Sure.
We passed. We've got the money. Everybody, unanimously voted, which I was stunned. Anyway, sewer's coming to Dennis, and it's going to assist. Now, it's not going to go everywhere, as you know, but it's going to be in the right places. And again, without getting into it, and so forth, we're there, but we have in my opinion, and this is my words, we have a housing crisis in the town of Dennis. There's a lot of people that don't believe that, but we really do. My wife's in real estate. And, today in the town of Dennis, you would be hard pressed to find a home that you would allow any of your family members to live in, under $600,000. And it's crazy. I mean, I got 3 kids, 30, 24, and 22. I don't have the money to give them all $100,000 for a down payment. So we got a problem. you know, and Bob Samalik and I, you know, we've talked about it. I've talked about, you know, with a number of people, my fellow select board members, you know, we know that we have an issue, but I got to beat those 59ers up. And, you
Well,
know, and
John,
and
can I give you, John, I'm sorry, can I
Yes.
give you a perfect example of something that could pave the way for housing that's happening right now in your town?
Yep.
My business is in Dennis, right? I've owned a business there for 14 years.
Yep.
You guys recently had a hearing on the 10,000 square foot lot merger by zoning provision, right? And the current proposal on the table now requires, in the past, I would have to submit a letter from a real estate attorney stating the lot was merged or not merged and held in common ownership. The state has passed this law, and the top item on your provision is to provide that same letter, which costs $2,000 or $3,000 to have done. And I thought the intent was to open up these lots for development. You know what I mean? Like $3,000 is a refrigerator and a dishwasher for a young family. And we're gonna go make them put a letter in there that you're gonna drop in a file someplace and make it more expensive. It's like that sort of stuff is hard to stomach when we've come so far. I mean, that's a great little example, but it's $3,000. It's a lot of money.
Yep.
Yeah, updating, making sure that towns are updated with what the new law is, and are, you know, matching that, I think is a great thing that municipalities can do. I do want to be mindful of the time. We are past our 5 o'clock hour. And there is one other thing that I would just suggest, if you know, on the topic of, you know, how do you move housing faster? You know, one other thing to take a look at, John, for those areas that are not going to be sewered, or until they get sewered, is the concept of zoning by bedroom, as opposed to zoning by housing type, such as single family, multifamily, et cetera. If the concern is truly about wastewater, then it shouldn't matter if it's 5 bedrooms in a single family home or 5 bedrooms in a 2-bedroom, you know, duplex with a 3-bedroom on the other side, right? So there are ways to do that, and also to have it, you know, the design of it look like a single family home. There are really easy nibble around the edges ways that we can, you know, soften people to the concept of things other than single family homes. So that being said, I want to respect everyone's time. Catherine has one last slide for us, which has some of our last upcoming training, which is, this is part of a series. And so we had Advocacy 101 that I taught last month, or yeah, is it really only February? Feels like it was 3 months ago. And you know, we had this one on the planning boards, and next month is going to be on Town Meeting 101. And the idea is for these to build on each other. So, you know, getting comfortable, you can go back and watch that one on Advocacy 101, where I talk about how to just get comfortable, you know, showing up to a planning board meeting or a select board meeting and making your voice heard. Then, you know, you've got this one, so you've learned about now how the planning board plays this really critical role, and we want you to, you know, be able to voice your support for housing in this critical stage. The final stage for everyone but Barnstable and Falmouth is open town meeting, and so we'll be talking about that on March 12th.
And Stephanie, I just wanted to add, I'm dropping my contact info into the chat if anyone wants to learn any more about Chapter 40Y, or if there are any other ways that myself or we at Housing Assistance could be supportive of pro-housing strategies.
Great. Well, thank you all for staying past time. We appreciate everyone's engagement today. Really great discussion. We look forward to continuing to work with you all, you know, on really finding solutions. So have a great night. Like we said, we'll stay in touch. John will make sure you're on our mailing list moving forward. And we really look forward to continuing our partnership here locally. So take care.
Thank
Love
our
you guys.
speakers,
Thank
Jim
you.
Stamen and Matt.
Yes,
Tate.
thank you
so
to our
much.
speakers, and Rob
Thank you.
for joining us last minute.
And Rob for pinching.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye,
See you.
everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Great job, Steph. Great job, Jim.